So tell me about Napoles, who he was. I know he was from Cuba, and I know he lived in Mexico and fought out of Mexico. Could you tell me just one, how great he was, why he moved, what was his amateur career? Anything you know about that?
Well, he was a great. I became then great friends with his manager, Cuco Conde. He was a legendary fellow. He was the manager of the Tropicana Casino in Havana. Great sports writer, broadcaster in baseball, but he also was involved in boxing. He had worked for Pincho Gutierrez, who was the manager of Kid Chocolate, the first great Cuban fighter to come to America and get worldwide attention and become champion. And Montequilla Napoles, they call him, that was smooth as butter for the English language people, right? And he was in a stable with the Baby Luis, who was a great bantamweight, Sugar Ramos, who became featherweight champ, himself, Florentino Fernandez, and another fighter, Doug Vaillant, who went on to fight for the lightweight championship of the world, and then Louis Rodriguez as well.
Okay.
All right. So Napoles was the Cuban fighters at that time were more noted as their boxing abilities, slick boxers, beautiful. They were great technicians.
Still to this day, that's how they're known. Yeah.
Yes, but Sugar Ramos was a slugger, and so was Florentino Fernandez. And Montequilla, though, the style is smooth as butter. And he was winning and losing in Cuba. He beat a couple of good fighters, Bunny Grant. And then when Castro came in, and I've never had this explained to me properly, why they wouldn't allow professional boxing. You could be a bus driver, you could be a cab driver, you could be a carpenter, but what? Boxing's a profession like anything else. I don't understand what were the prohibition. But anyway, they eliminated professional boxing about 1960, and then they made a move to Mexico. Cuco Conde had a relationship with Pancho Rosales, who was the most famous of the Mexican managers. They've been going there for years, exchanging boxers, coming to Cuba, going to Mexico. And they moved out. They went there rather than to Miami. They felt that because at the time, with the language barrier, it would have been easier to transition into Mexico. And so when Napoles went there, he was just establishing himself at that time. And he was in the shadow of Sugar Ramos, who was about a year or two older than him.
Okay.
And he was boxing. He won. He lost a fight or so. And they said, you've got to change your style. You're a good boxer, but the Mexicans like sluggers. They like knockout punches. And he basically said, well, I could punch, but I really didn't emphasize that because, I was winning there.
His style.
Yeah, the style of all the guys. You see the guys in the gym, and by osmosis, you pick up that type of way of boxing. So they adjusted him to be a knockout puncher, and then he started knocking out all these contenders. There was a famous fight where he lost a controversial decision to a Mexican fighter named Alfredo Urbina. And after that, Napoles said, that sort of made it for me. And he went into the rematch and he knocked him out in one round. And that sort of started him out. And he was the top #1 lightweight contender for Carlos Ortiz. He had beaten, as I said, Napoles had beaten Angel Robinson Garcia and Urbina. And he had beaten Bunny Grant, who was the top contender. But they couldn't get a fight because they couldn't generate the money for him to get the title fight. And then he moved up to 140 pounds, and he beat Carlos Morocho Hernandez, a great puncher, knocked him out in Venezuela, which was Hernandez's home country.
Okay.
And then he outpointed...
For a title? For a title?
No, he couldn't get the title. This is before, ironically, Morocho went on to win the title after that.
Oh, okay.
And then he beat Eddie Perkins, who was the junior welterweight champ, and he was the #1 contender there and couldn't get a title fight. Then he fought L.C. Morgan. He got a cut eye. They stopped the fight, so he lost his position. But he bounced right back and beat Morgan. So he was #1 contender in 2 divisions, lightweight, junior welter. Still couldn't get a title fight, even though he'd beaten 2 former champs. So then they moved him up to welterweight. And he had turned pro about 1958, and this was getting into the mid-'60s. And George Parnassus, who was a great manager, he managed Seferino Garcia, Enrique Bolaños, and then he became matchmaker for the Olympic Auditorium, and then a promoter on his own. He came back and made a deal to promote in the Forum as a competitor to the Olympic Auditorium, where his former employer, Eileen Eaton, was still going.
Okay.
And when Parnassus came along, he brought Napoles in on the first show. He won by knockout in 1 round over a fighter from Philadelphia, Leroy Roberts, and he impressed the fans. And finally had a guy like Parnassus who was willing to put up the money to bring the champion. And they had offered Curtis Coates at the time $50,000, which was pretty good in 1968 to fight Napoles. He turned it down. Then he went to 60. Then he went to 70. And they finally got him to come in for $80,000. And Napoles got his chance, and he won. He stopped Curtis Coates, another Hall of Famer, in the 13th round. But one of the preconditions was he had to give Coates a rematch within 90 days, which is almost unheard of They figured Napoles would party afterwards, but he went back in and fought in Mexico City and stopped him a second time, and then beat Emil Griffith that year, and then beat Ernie Red Lopez, the #1 contender, in February. So within 8 months, he had beaten Coates twice, Griffith, and Ernie Red Lopez. He was a truly great fighter.
Wow. And in 8 months, he has whatever 5-6 fights.
Yes.
Now, guys fighting once or twice a year. It's such a difference as to what's happening now as to what was happening then. What's your opinion on the activity of the fighters currently?
Yeah, I think they should be more active. You know, to bring up again about Napoles, he turned pro in '58, didn't get a world title fight till 1969. It was 11 years, and he's fighting the best fighters in the world. His manager explained, you know, it's not just getting the fight. It's the disappointment. He beats a guy, Hernandez, who goes on and wins the world title. He beats a guy who was world champ. He's sitting there #1, and he can't get the frustration they have to deal with. And today, you go in, you either win or lose. You're a winner or a loser within, you know, a half a dozen fights. You're marked winner or you're marked loser. And if you go through the box rec where they have a listing of the ratings and the records of the fighters, you see 60% of the fighters are undefeated, and 40% have a bunch of losses. And the same 40% have lost to all those undefeated fighters, so they have the records. You build a record today. It's not trial and error where a loss, yes, it's not ending your career. It's a setback, but you just don't give up. These guys like Napoles or Emil Griffith or Eddie Perkins, they lose a fight, but a month later they come back and win. You know, they eradicate it and just keep fighting and fighting. Today it's like an all or nothing thing. They want to become millionaires or they want to fight at all. It's not a job. It's a profession.
Yeah. I agree with you in that sense that a lot of times the business gets in the way of the sport of boxing, and I understand that this is a business, but a lot of times one fighter be with one promoter, another fighter be with another one, or the other fighter is clearly the #1 guy, but you know they're making excuses as to not to fight him because he doesn't sell tickets and he's not worth the risk versus the reward. And there's a lot of that goes on now, which is somewhat disappointing. And hearing a story like this where a guy fights top contenders for 11 years,
and doesn't get a title fight,
doesn't get a title shot, it's crazy. And he fought when there was just one belt at the time?
There was one champion at the time, and he made 13 defenses of the title. He went up to Syracuse, fought Billy Backus. He lost, and that's another story. But it took 6 months to get the rematch. He knocked him out, and then he came back and went on right on the tear. He beat Hedgeman Lewis. He beat Lopez again. He beat Adolph Pruitt. He beat Ralph Charles. He beat Roger Menetre. Went through all the top contenders. And in between those fights, he would fight non-title fights. So they would be fighting all the time, and he's not an exception to the rule. Emil Griffith, you know, was fighting all of the time, and you know, and these were great fights.